Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 234th New Social Environment. I'm Charlie Schultz, managing editor at the Rail. I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation with our guest critics, Sara Roffino and Tiago Gualberto, as well as the translator who worked on their page, Ramón Stern, and contributors Vivian Braga, André Pitol, and Viviane Pistache. We're also thrilled to have the poet Caetano Dias here, who will have a special presentation for us at the end. To begin, I ask you to join me in acknowledging the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation, the traditional owners of Lenapehoking, the unceded land and waters on which we stand. Finally, the Brooklyn Rail stands in solidarity with the uprisings in response to the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, Nina Pop, David McAtee, James Scurlock, Jamal Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Rashard Brooks, Rhea Milton, Dominique Remy Fells, Toyin Salau, Walter Wallace Jr., and countless others we have lost to white supremacy and police violence in this country, and acknowledge that justice will come from the streets, from the nation demanding accountability and refusing to move on until Black Lives Matter in the eyes of the state. Before I introduce our hosts, we'd like to begin with a brief moment of silence. Thank you. And now to introduce today's hosts. Sara Roffino is a writer and our local ArtSeen editor. Tiago Gualberto is a visual artist and researcher who has stood out for a number of projects, including those at São Paulo's Afro Brazil Museum and his partnership with the Design Studio for Social Intervention in Boston. He's currently part of the body of art critics at the São Paulo Cultural Center and an invited instructor at the Alternative Art School. Sara and Tiago, take it away.
Thank you, Charlie. It is really an honor to be a part of this issue. Just to give everybody a little bit of background, I first met Tiago in 2018. I was writing about the Tarsila do Amaral show at MoMA, and talking with somebody from MoMA, a curator, about the exhibition and sort of trying to understand how Tarsila's work is understood within the contemporary context. And it became very clear to me that there was a huge disconnect between what what was being presented and what I imagined were conversations people were having within Brazil. And so I started to do some very naive research, really, I did not know what people were talking about anthropophagy. I did not know what kinds of conversations were happening around race or class in Brazil. It was a very uninformed investigation. And through my research, I was introduced to Tiago, and Tiago has shared with me so incredibly generously and thoughtfully and with precision and kindness over these past few years. So this issue, excuse me, is really, I hope, me being a version of me being able to share what Tiago has shared with me with the rest of the world. His research and his thinking and the people who he brought in to participate in this have put together something that I think is essential and is timely and is really beautiful. So I'm going to pass it along to him right now, and he will take it away.
Oh, thank you for the perception about the birds. My neighbors has a little bird here, so how can not start saying thanks for this meeting with Sara. I think all this was possible just because we met, and despite all my difficulties and talking English and exchange some informations and everything else about people who are not so closely, because this new way to communicate by WhatsApp and mail and all these stuffs. And despite all these, we build in this last 3 years, strong connection and a strong desire to share ideas. And as Sara did with me, I'm so honored to do this similar idea with my friends and colleagues and thinkers who I totally respect, as André Pitol, as Viviane, and Ramón, of course, because, well, we'll talk more about him, but his participation in this project was fundamental. And so I would like to say thank you, Ramón. And well, to try to be prompt here, I just prepare a short text about our main aim here, and I try not to read, but as I'm so exciting, I prefer not do a big mistake. So as you probably know, for these issues of the Broken Rail, we have asked a group of mostly Brazilian artists and thinkers to consider the significance and meaning of anthropophagia in the contemporary context on the cusp of the movement's 100th anniversary. And with this presentation is to consider the history of this concept and how it's currently exists and expressed within contemporary Brazilian art. Who has consumed and digested whom before and since Oswald de Andrade penned the Manifesto Anthropophago? What has that mean for the polyvalent nature of Brazil as its political powers have swum from dictatorship to democracy and back? Was anthropophagia even relevant? Is it now? So with those questions, thinking together with Sara, we are not denying the importance of this concept, which it deserves a lot of respect, or even waiting for a simple and one response from these questions. On the contrary, we are open to different points of view, to different languages, aesthetics and styles, places and backgrounds, with distinct ages even, and experience. So the result is a powerful multiplicity of voice. But something was a lot important during the entire process. We looking for voices who are not largely observed in Brazil art circuit and institutions. And so, thank you, Nick, for sharing. So, and we have this honor to put together 16 thinkers and artists, and I think it's important to say their names. Sorry for that; it's a huge list, but I feel this is necessary. So we have in this edition Sandra Benites, Rosana Paulino, Vivian Braga dos Santos, Rafael Amorim, Denilson Baniwa, Viviane Pistache, Thaís Berb, Mila Jung, André Pitol, Cláudia Andujar, Maria Clavo, Sérgio Vaz, Caetano Dias, Cripta Dijan e Renato Araújo da Silva. So in this 16th century engraving by the Flemish artist Theodore de Brie, we can see the German explorer Hans Staden depicted watching a Tupinambá group practicing anthropophagy. So that there is a very common comical situation here with this white man in the middle of this group who is not usually seen, but But anyway, in summary, for many centuries, this image was one of the most viewed image about Brazil for the outside world, made by non-Brazilians. And basically this image depicts these people as a primitive. And could you jump for another image, Nick? And much centuries later, Abapuru, this painting from Tarsila do Amaral, plays a fundamental role in the dissemination of modernist ideas, sorry for my delay in choosing my words in English, but it's so hard to summarize the aims of modernist movement in Brazil and how they basically try to create a Brazilian art despite all interventions from Europeans and all these European heritage who I try to represent through the Hansestad portrait. But so this I choose these two pictures just to exemplify how this painting is still playing a big role, not only in the academic and artistic scene, but even among children. And these simple images demonstrate how the modernist vocabulary, that's it, the ideas of assimilation, swallowing of the older and the primitive are made from the very early age in Brazil. And could you jump in again, Nick, please? So basically, I'm trying to show how, despite the anthropophagy could look something hermetic and distant from maybe an American audience for us Brazilians, we are in touch with these ideas in a very early way. So it's not by chance that the tiny head of Tarsila do Amaral's characters continues to fascinate us Brazilians. And could you jump again, please? So just to finish my brief introduction, I hope that the protagonism of the Brazilian head, and not only hands and feet, will also be felt through the contribution of these incredible artists and thinkers in this edition of Broken Rail. And here we can see a painting from Denilson Baniwa, photograph from Thais Berbe. The next, please. Another photograph from Caetano Dias and his sculpture. And a frame from a video from Crypta de Jean during a very special moment described for him in our intervention, in our interview. And so, and thank you again for our Broken Rail team, especially Ponku and Charlie and Nick for our care and passion. And thank you so much. I'm so honored to be part of this special edition. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tiago. So now Ramón, who is our I'm claiming him, our translator. Ramón did an absolutely incredible work with a huge amount of sensitivity and intellect of the background of the issues being discussed in these texts to make them available both in English and in Portuguese. And he's going to talk a little bit about his process and the criticality that went into his work as well.
Okay, thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you so much, Tiago. Thank you, Charlie, Nick, and the entire Brooklyn Rail team. Thank you to all of the contributors for creating texts that were just such an amazing experience to be able to translate and engage with. I wanted to just briefly talk about my own exposure to Anthropophagia and then talk a little about my translation process. I didn't learn about Anthropophagia until I was in college when I was studying Portuguese and studying Brazil. And my experience with Anthropophagia, whether or not it's similar to Brazilians or not, I can't say, but was one of really, it's seen as a glorious moment of great invention and very much kind of idealized as a movement. I didn't really learn about the context too much of the people who created the movement, what part of Brazilian society they were from, anything like that. I just kind of learned, I just read the manifesto and saw some of the art. And so when Tiago mentioned to me this project, and when I started thinking about the urgency of these kinds of texts seeing light in English, that would take a look at anthropophagy from a critical perspective, that a multiplicity of voices that engaged it from different vantage points, which could give some sort of context for it, could give some sort of understanding of the limitations of it, and criticize the way in which it's often deified or idealized in Brazilian culture. I jumped at the opportunity because my training is in comparative literature and language, and I have been working in that area for quite some time. Also an administrator related to Brazil for 6.5 years. I administered the Brazil Initiative at Brown University. And the amount of things through that process also that I continued to learn about Brazil made this a project that was just very exciting, because as many of us know, while certain texts may see light in Portuguese, they often may not be translated into English. So what's exciting about this is that online there's available all of these critical takes on Brazilian art and modernism and culture and society that very often in the English language don't get that much circulation. So I took that upon me to really do the best possible job that I could do, and efficiently but also really sensitively translate these texts, because it's an amazing combination of texts with really, really deep reflections, really a lot of subtleties and complexities as far as the language, a lot of specifics to Brazil, but also really powerful messages that I feel were able to breathe in the English that I put together. And I also want to thank Renato Araújo da Silva for being the main translator of Caetano Dias's poem, which we'll see later, because when I saw it, I almost had I almost panicked, because I was like, this is so amazing, but this is so impossible. I need a native speaker of Portuguese who has English skills to work on this before then maybe going over it. So I corrected, some of the English, but his skills and being able to render it were so amazing that I read his English, and then I started understanding the poem better and what it was saying in the original Portuguese, because me and Tiago had a conversation. Tiago was like, I don't even understand this poem. How are you going to translate this? So it's a really powerful poem that has a lot to say, but in really difficult language. So I wanted to thank him for stepping in and helping with that. And the texts are all amazing. I was touched by all of them in a variety of different ways. But I think Renato Araújo da Silva's text is an incredible, for me, it taught me so much about the history of anthropophagy and put it in a whole different perspective than I had ever seen done before. And I think I don't remember whether his was the first text that I started translating. Maybe that's one of the reasons why it's in the back of my head in particular. But all of these texts are amazing takes. I think the really, really important message is, you know, as said in the name of the issue, is only anthropophagy unites us. It's, you know, a provocative question, because in the manifesto it says that, and all of these texts show that the idea of anthropophagy has a multiplicity of meanings. It doesn't unite people. In fact, it just like many other concepts in Brazilian culture, it exposes all kinds of fault lines and divisions within Brazilian society, and all kinds of inequalities and injustices, and that to silence those things because the art or the manifesto is captivating is not the way to go. And I think that this edition really contributes a powerful message in relationship to reassessing, rethinking, continuing to talk through how anthropophagy fits within Brazilian society on the whole, instead of just as this supposed shining moment of creativity and artistic innovation. So that's.
I was just gonna jump in and add to that what Ramon is what to add to that, the manifesto says "So anthropophagia nos une" as a statement, and what we did here, per Tiago's brilliant idea, is make it into a question. So the title of the section is a question as opposed to a statement, and although that's a subtle grammatical shift, I think it actually has huge implications for what we're trying to do. And I actually don't know if that question has ever been asked before. So sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to make that point.
No, absolutely. I think that's and one of the things that I said in my note in the edition is that it shows that any sense of unity based off of anthropophagy and its ideas of innovation is faulty at best, is not something that can be taken for granted within Brazilian society. And so many of the different pieces really get at that, from Rafael Amorim's statements about creating art from the outskirts of the city or the periferia or suburbio, to Vivian Braga dos Santos talking about almost Brazilians. There's so many different vantage points from which this concept can be reassessed. Yes, Tiago.
So if I can just add some, just a little thought, it's, but we should, just for our audience who maybe were not so conscious about the details in this complex history about anthropophagia, but we should keep in mind that Oswald de Andrade in that moment was in front of a kind of big wave of conservadorism, a big wave of, well, we are just 40 years from the slavery, sorry, how can I?
Emancipation. Or end
yes.
of slavery.
And the slavery. So he deserves recognize. Obviously, he is very important. He did a very important statement when he asked for some units to fight with different kind of violent and conservatorist ideas. But again, we are in front of another, and maybe so as giant as before, in front of a big wave of conservadorism. So this issue is just it's a question, obviously, but it's a kind of statement to invite it to think in a collective way about this context. Sorry, just
no, that's great. That's a great statement. I don't know if I have any time left, so I don't want to extend my conversation much more. I'll just say that I think the other important thing that comes out in the issue is that in the period in which the Anthropophagus Manifesto was written and in which and also the years before with the week of modern art in São Paulo. What happens later in history, decades later, is very different in terms of how it's received. So, you know, in the time period in which it was written, and in which the modernist movement was being created, there was a lot of resistance. That's true. But then later, the elites latched onto the idea and made it into something very quintessentially Brazilian, kind of nationalist idea, all kinds of things. So it's interesting to see that history.
I think one more thing about, just to add on, thank you, Ramon, but to add on to sort of my interest in why we wanted to publish everything in both Portuguese and English, is because I think that my colleagues in America who don't speak Portuguese, we have so much to learn from the way that these ideas have been thought about in Brazil and from people like who have contributed to this issue. I think oftentimes it's really seen as like a one-way path, but there's a humor and there is an insightfulness and so much complexity to these ideas that I think we really need to be more receptive to them. And unfortunately, because of language differences, it's not often possible. Many of these texts, as Ramon said, are not available in English. But we in North America are also trying to understand the long-term effects of modernism and colonialism. We have a lot to learn from people who are making and thinking in Brazil as well. So I wanted to be really clear that it's a two-way translation because everybody benefits, I hope. So I think it is André's stage now. André, are you ready?
Sorry, Sara, is Vivian, please.
Vivian, sorry, yes. Desculpa.
Thank you, Sara. Thank you, Tiago. I speak French. I speak a French speaker than I English speaker, so I prepare 2 pages for you. Hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure to participate with you in this conversation. As my colleagues, I was pleased to contribute with this project, which is both original and necessary. But I can't hide the fact that this joy was followed by a certain fear. The questions posed by Sara, Roffino, and Tiago Gualberto when they extended this invitation resonate in my mind for long weeks before I was able to write some first lines that I raised, of course. And the question was, how does the concept and the idea of anthropophagy cross our works, our research? How? Normally, before this experience, if anyone had asked me if anthropophagy has a place in my research work, I decisively would have answered, no, I don't work with this concept. But Sara's and Tiago's questions did not look like a curiosity. They sound more like a challenge. We know that anthropophagy is there. Tell us where, when, how, and why. In my works, I examine the relationship between contemporary art, political conflicts, history, and memory. And this labor of the years had led me to investigate the role of archives and performances, more specifically lecture performances, in artistic practice. Recently, I am focused on a project about tensions between contemporary art and conflicts over racial issues, and how archives and embodiment practice respond to this. I started to think about the divergence between these two models, archive and performance. for saving and producing memory, notably in the case of documentary collections of Western representations of the Black body and the subversive practice of embodiment. Among several possibilities that we can observe as forms of encounters between archive and performance, I am interested in their battlefield, the performance as a means of escaping the enclosure of the archive and the biopolitical control on the bodies. I see the performance not just about to present itself in a performance art context. In the times when contemporary art takes ownership of bodies and identities previously rejected by it, and spread this democratic invitation as an opening of the artistic universe, it is necessary to work with the possibility that some artists developed not fake identities, but jokers' identities. Through them, they refuse to be targeted by the single recognized identity. Instead, they manipulate the scenario with their multiple identities. In my contribution, Almost Brazilian, I tried to work this idea of some artistic identities as a deviation, a way to refuse the control of contemporary art on these bodies. In this context, anthropophagy is a performative tool through which artists divorce other identities, digest and assimilate them in order to modify themselves by these solid vocabularies. Not to create an individual identity, but by the genocide of the others, but to be many others, and to keep existing contemporary art without ever being captured and controlled. These performers' identities don't have a form. While I was thinking about how to present this non-form to you, I imagined this body with multiple heads dancing, and in an instant, this dancing group divided itself, went away, returned, appearing, disappearing every time. A Medusa, not a woman decapitated by Perseus, but the one of the statues by Luciano Gallardi, which holds Perseus' heads while she raises her forehead. It is this Medusa, queen, that I also see in Rosana Paulino, the powerful Black woman with multiple breasts who hides in her skirt thousands of eyes. Medusa and Queen are just some examples because, as I said, the Almost Brazilian isn't one form. However, it has the counterform, the unity that we name it nationalist identity. In Brazilian case, the Brazilian embedded itself in the image of the mestiço. This image, whose creation was presented as an exercise, an anthropology exercise, as part of a project of nation, was described by our professor, Renato Araújo da Silva. In his text for this volume, We Are Borg, Anthropophagy, a Primitive Future 100 Years Ago in Brazil. Because of this opposition, performativity can also be understood as a counter-performance, because it develops itself in the opposite directions of the performance, expected by the Building Nation project, theorized by Omibaba and explained by my dear friend Maria Inigo Cravo, and in her contribution to this number, Sons of the Nation. The almost Brazilian refuses to reproduce the model of the narcissist father who announces a false positive miscegenation and expects to see the reflection of his model in our bodies. Thus, artists slip through the fingers of a Brazilian art, which Renato da Silva Araújo da Silva, writes, creates itself, I quote, as class entertainment. To be unknown, to be almost Brazilian is, in the end, to me, to refuse to be the someday entertainment. Thank you.
Thank you. I think your text is one of the ones that really inverts this idea of the anthropophagist existence as consumed and allows it to be something that becomes a source of empowerment. And I think that your text is really beautiful in that way. And with the images by Hosanna, it really came together beautifully. And I think we're now on to, we can come back if people have questions or want to talk more specifically, but I want to make sure that everybody gets a chance to talk a little bit about their section. So André is up next this time. And André wrote very valiantly about Claudia Andujar. It was not an easy assignment. And he really, I think also did a beautiful job of complicating the whole idea of anthropophagia. So on to André.
Okay, thank you, Sara, and thank you, Tiago, and everybody in the Broken Rail team. First of all, this invitation, this opportunity to contribute in this special issue of Critics Page, allowing me to write about this incredible and powerful work that is the photography of Claudia Andujar, as Sara mentioned. I consider myself an art researcher. I finished a master in history, criticism, and theory of art, and also a bachelor in printmaking at the University of São Paulo in 2013 and 2016, where I am now a PhD candidate and a member of the research group Art Design and Digital Media. But during this whole a decade studying, I had and I still have a huge interest for photography, mainly to research and to write about it, about its stories and its practitioners. For almost a decade now, I've been researching, for example, the work of the Brazilian photographer Aleir Gomes, especially the photographic projects he produced in the United States, working with Quentin Fiori, the Marshall McLuhan's designer, and also publishing in magazines and art books in New York, Los Angeles, and San Francisco between the 70s and the 80s. For this reason, this is a very nice opportunity to have this conversation about photography in a different context, which is the question Sara and Tiago asked about the importance of anthropophagia in contemporary scene. Só anthropophagia nos une? No, this is the question. My contribution to this journal of February is a reflection about the photographic work of Claudia Andujar. She's a Swiss-born Brazilian photographer who dedicated most part of her life documenting and protecting the Yanomami, one of the largest indigenous groups, a group who lives in the Amazon area between Brazil and Venezuela. In face of these multiple and possible connections between photography and anthropophagy, I was curious to understand not only in terms of the visual perspective of the indigenous imagery, but also paying a little attention to the linguistic aspects of the photographic event. This is why I chose the title of the text. The text is entitled Cláudia Andujar, Anthropophagy, Fenkepezes, Yanomami. Anthropophagy in French, in relation to the childhood of Andujar, but also a kind of reminding of the French aspirations of the avant-garde movements of the 1920s, including the travels of Tarsila do Amaral and Oswald de Andrade from São Paulo to Paris and back and forth. Fenkepezes, the Hungarian word for photography, I guess contemplates the years Andujar lived in Oradea in Romania, speaking French and Hungarian with her family before World War II, and Nazism forced her to move to the United States, where she lived for some years studying at the Hunter College in New York and working as a visitor guide at the United Nations building until she finally immigrates to Brazil in 1955, where she lives until now. She's 19 years old now. And the last part of the title, Yanomami, for obvious reasons, in relation to the main purpose of her photographic career, starting while she was a photojournalist traveling in Brazil until she kept in touch with Yanomami in the beginning of the 70s and decided to devote pretty much an exclusive time documenting their journey through the Amazon forest and living with them. The Yanomami are more than 300 communities, and they speak 5 different languages. In this way, the visual elements of Andujar's photography and, as I suggest, the linguistic element of the photographic event between them is important for our consideration about the concept of anthropophagy in contemporary scene. In the process of staying with Yanomami, Andujar herself said that before she started photographing the people, the forest, and so on, first of all, she stayed for several months living there in a way of earning the trust of Yanomami. In this process, also, the photographic image was not the only part involved, but there's also the language involved, not only the lack of it, but also the very possibilities of it. This example, I think, is allow us to look not only to the photographic image of Andujar as a final product, but instead we may connect with the surroundings of this photo event, as for example, the affective pact she made with people she photographed, the activism and the engagement in the defense of Yanomami rights, starting in the 70s, but crossing the entire 80s and 90s. Clearly, there's a movement from art to activism in Andujar's route, from photojournalism to direction to the use of photography in political actions. And to close this very brief comment, I would like to bring to the conversation also another art project called Plus IT, realized by the Brazilian artist Mila Jung, which is also part of this Brooklyn Rail issue about anthropophagy. Plus IT, the Neon project, is an artistic intervention in the central plaza of the city of Curitiba, is a city in the south of Brazil. The project consists of a bright installation in neon at the top of a building called Nossa Senhora da Luz, Our Lady of Light. At nighttime, the neon featured the terms Plus IT, which in Haitian Creole means Haitian place. giving visibility to the name that Haitian immigrant refugees used to refer to the plaza where they met as any community. Once again, we see another project that explore not only the visual aspect of the encounters between communities, but also the linguistic and affective connections to it. Mila Jung presents to us the components of any contemporary artwork, like the neon light, the use of photography of the neon in postcards to the Haitian public, with the purpose to send those postcards to Haiti by post mail, and making visible the incorporation of this immigrant presence that is now situated as a critical transcultural image that creates a new reality in Brazil, as Jung says. Because of it, because the presence of Claudia Andujar and also Mila Jung to this conversation, I thank you all for the attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. I would actually like to ask you one question. Sorry to put you on the spot.
Okay.
If you, I would love if you could talk, and I know you talk about this in the piece, but if you could distill what it is about Claudia Andujar's photography that separates it from being one of consumption or othering or exotifying. Was it a development in her practice that happened over time, or was it her approach from the beginning? Because I'm just curious if you can maybe expand or talk a little bit more specifically about how she avoids the consumption
of anthropophagy,
Yeah.
you said. Okay. Looking and researching on other commentators about Andujar, it is a little difficult to find this term anthropophagy related to her work. And also in a lot of interviews or interviews she made in videos recorded, we see a more Andujar talking about this missing of family, this relation between groups, and this kind of for me it's like a different strategy, a different contemporary strategy for the use of photographia. There's another contemporary artists like Cildo Meirelles, other contemporary artists that we see more in a explicit way this relation between, for example, the photography and the anthropophagy, not only as a reminiscence or other type of contemporary art strategy, but in the way Claudia Andujar make her photography and the way she stands as in defense of Yanomami, it's like a parallel path in Brazil in the second part of the 20th century. There's this more stronger path about anthropophagy and another movements from the 60s and the 70s. But it's like we see now, we see Claudia Andujar's work from the 20s, thinking about that past. But in the 60s and 70s, Claudia Andujar was not so close to these other groups. So we do this kind of connection now, but at that time it is like a parallel, I would say. Tiago has something.
Just a short record, if I can. It's necessary to say that similar with happened with Oswald de Andrade in 1928, and similar with happened now in front of this conservadorism wave. We should remember that Claudio Andujar was in front of another kind of big violence named dictatorship in Brazil. So if this connections with another artist was not so clear and not so evident in Andujar, but we can say that the dictatorship was clearly a force who she had to relate.
Totally.
Thank you, Andre.
Thank you.
And our final participant contributor is Vivi Pistache, who wrote a really wonderful short story for our publication. And I'm going to turn it over to her now.
Primeiramente, desculpas, né, por ser a única aqui nessa conversa falar em português. E quero agradecer. Como vai ser? Eu falo e o Ramon vai traduzindo? Como?
Sim. Just so everybody knows, Vivi is going to talk in Portuguese, and then Ramon is going to translate. So,
so she said, first, I want to thank everyone for this opportunity to speak, and I'll be speaking in Portuguese.
E eu quero muito agradecer o convite do Tiago
I want to thank Tiago for the invitation.
E a tradução do Ramon.
And Ramon's translation.
E dizer que eu estou muito feliz por ter chegado nessa publicação a partir de dois amigos queridos que a vida me deu a oportunidade de ter.
And that I'm very happy to have had the opportunity to become a part of this publication through two very dear friends of mine that I've had the joy of getting to know.
Vou fazer trocadilho infame para dizer há quanto tempo eu conheço o Tiago, né? A gente
It's gonna make a little infamous statement about how long she's known Tiago.
A gente era tão jovem, mas tão jovem, que o Tiago ainda não tinha comido ninguém, tomado a saliva de ninguém na vida.
Okay, I'll translate this, but this is a little bit vulgar. So they were very, very young and inexperienced. Let's just put it that way. Tiago was a young and inexperienced person, and so was she. I'll just leave it there.
Bom, mas brincadeiras à parte, eu também era completamente virgem de carne e alma humana, não só o Tiago.
But joking aside, in relationship to human flesh, I was also a virgin.
Mas a gente teve a oportunidade de compartilhar muitos afetos, né, e nos alimentar de esperanças e de dilemas, né?
We had the opportunity to share a great deal of affection and also hopes and dreams together.
A minha vida, né, intelectual, acadêmica, começa na UFMG, né? A nossa vida, tanto a minha quanto a dele, começou mais ou menos no mesmo tempo.
Our intellectual and academic lives began in the same place around the same time and at the Federal University of Minas Gerais.
E numa universidade de prestígio, que é a UFMG.
In a very prestigious university, Federal University of Minas Gerais.
Num momento em que o Brasil ainda não tinha adotado política de cotas para as universidades federais.
Before Brazil had adopted the affirmative action quotas as a policy.
E entrar numa universidade numa perspectiva muito eurocêntrica e branca e tendo pouca gente negra naquele universo.
And to go to a university with an extremely Eurocentric and white perspective, where there were very, very few Black people.
A gente tinha sentimento de ambiguidade muito profunda, né?
We had a very, very profound feeling of ambiguity and ambivalence there.
Desconforto gigante por não ter pessoas semelhantes a nós ali.
A great discomfort for there not being people similar to us there.
e fascínio gigante pela oportunidade de se alimentar da experiência europeia também.
And also a fascination for the opportunity to feed off of this European experience as well.
E continuei a minha formação todo esse tempo nesse equilíbrio difícil, né, de
Yeah, and then during the whole time that I was there, I had to balance these two forces that I was
de entender a minha negritude naquele espaço e me fortalecer também com ferramentas europeias.
So understanding my Blackness in that space, and then also taking strength in tools, European tools as well.
Por muito tempo eu imaginei que apostaria numa carreira acadêmica,
For a
gostava
long
muito,
time, I thought I would be in an academic career.
gostava muito da atividade, gosto ainda, né, muito da atividade de pesquisa.
I liked, and I still like very much the process of research, academic research.
Mas eu fui chegando num momento de uma outra ambiguidade, assim.
But that I also entered into another feeling of ambiguity in relationship to this.
Apesar de ter um título de doutora, eu não conseguia fazer um concurso público para professora universitária, porque eu simplesmente não conseguia efetivamente me ver no lugar de professora universitária.
So even though I was a doctor with a PhD, I was not able to see myself or understand myself in that position of as a professor in one of the universities in Brazil.
E eu comecei a sentir que faltava proximidade com a base, né, com o meu povo preto, com a minha vizinhança, né? Quanto mais elaborado ficava o meu discurso acadêmico, mais longe eu me sentia dos meus.
So the more and more that she was involved in this academic world, more she felt this lack of proximity and a need for proximity to a base to her own Black people, which she didn't feel in the academic world.
E eu fiz esse movimento meio brusco de apostar noutra carreira, que é a de escrita para o cinema.
And so she took the step to place her bets on a career in writing for cinema, in writing film as a screenwriter.
E é muito possível fazer cinema e audiovisual no Brasil de muitas formas e para muitos públicos também, né? São múltiplos públicos possíveis.
It's very possible to do film and audiovisual work for many different public audiences and groups of people in Brazil.
E para mim hoje me interessa muito mais construir material audiovisual, séries de cinema e roteiro para séries e cinemas que seja o mais popular possível.
And I'm interested in creating audiovisual material, screenplays, and films that are as for working class people, for the real Brazil.
E a minha escrita, como é voltada para o audiovisual, tenta sempre apostar e ancorar nas imagens, né?
And her writing seeks to anchor itself in images and the audiovisual, very much so.
E talvez isso tenha ficado um pouco perceptível no meu texto.
And maybe that is very perceptible in my text.
E gostaria de agradecer muito o Ramon, porque deliberadamente eu escrevi com sotaque mineiro, e eu não sei quão desafiador deve ter sido essa tradução.
And so she wants to thank me, Ramon, for the translation, because the story was written in a Mineiro accent from Minas Gerais, and I can attest to that. It was written in a very Mineiro way, and it was very complicated to translate.
E apesar de querer, né, conversar e escrever para grandes audiências, né, A gente tenta manter o mínimo o debate racial e de gênero elevado, né? Popularizar esses debates, né?
And though there is the goal to write for a larger public, it's really important to elevate as much as possible race and gender, discussions of race and gender within this realm.
E para mim tem sido uma tarefa agridoce poder falar de belezas e tristezas do modo mais simples possível.
For me, it's been a bittersweet experience. There's happiness and sadness, joy and sadness in the process, just to state it in the most simple terms.
E na escrita desse texto, especificamente, eu tentei trazer um debate que nem sempre é dito com a frequência necessária.
And with this text, I sought to animate a debate that is not brought out as much as maybe it should.
A gente vive num momento de fabulação política necessária da nossa herança ancestral.
I'm living in a time of fabulation of our ancestral heritage in politics.
E geralmente a gente tenta colocar em termos positivos, porque o racismo já foi eficiente demais em negar a beleza da nossa história.
And that repete, eu esqueci. Você pode repetir?
A gente vive num momento, coletivamente, né, falando de criadores negros, né?
We're living in a time period of many Black creators.
De afirmação da nossa herança, de um modo
of affirmation of our heritage.
E muitas das vezes a gente se esquiva de encarar o que é mais dolorido e feio nessa herança que permaneceu.
And many times we avoid what is most ugly and painful in that heritage.
Algumas vezes as nossas matriarcas e ancestrais são pintadas como mulheres fortes e que gostaram daquela tarefa.
And many times our matriarchs are painted as extremely strong and that they enjoyed taking on the tasks that were required in that time.
É muito confortável a imagem de uma avó acolhedora, de uma mãe acolhedora.
It's very comfortable to think of the mother and the grandmother as welcoming and warm.
E eu tentei trazer de alguma maneira o oposto disso, uma avó que detestava a função de ser mãe e de ser avó.
And so I tried to bring the opposite of that, a grandmother who hated being a mother and hated the function of being a grandmother as well.
E como é que ela costurava esse desafeto interno com as questões externas a ela, né? Do machismo.
And how she interwove that internal feeling of with the realities surrounding her.
E como é que os herdeiros se alimentaram, né, desse fel, desse amargo, desse feio que ela colocou no mundo.
And how her heirs took on the effects of all of those ugly and painful realities.
E como que encarar o nosso o que a gente tem de mais feio também é importante e libertador.
And how facing what is ugly in the history is such an important part of liberation as well.
E tentar, né, trazer um pouco de criticismo, né, para essa ideia encastelada e muito necessária, mas encastelada também de força e de resistência.
And to bring a critical perspective to these ideas that are very necessary of strength and resistance, but that are also very almost in their own space, in their own castle, and idealized, romanticized.
porque a gente construiu muita riqueza, né, e herdou muita pobreza.
We created a great deal of wealth and inherited a great deal of poverty.
Às vezes eu costumo brincar que pobre herda dívida.
Sometimes I like to say that the poor inherit debt.
E dentro dessa moldura, né, histórica do racismo,
And in that historical mold of racism,
e da nossa história, né, de escravocrata, de exploração dos nossos corpos e recursos,
and in that history of slavery and legacy of slavery and how it has taken hold of our bodies,
não é de fato um equilíbrio fácil, né? Entender do que nos alimentamos, né, em termos de herança, né?
it's not an easy balance to strike to figure out what to figure out how our bodies and ourselves are related to that inheritance.
E fiquei muito feliz com o texto do Caetano.
And I was very happy with Caetano's text.
Com essa imagem que ele traz das cabeças de açúcar, né?
And that image that he brings of the sugar heads.
Do quanto que a gente já tem, né, assentada a memória do sal do corpo negro, né, que o corpo negro produz sal de suor, de trabalhar.
We already have the image of the idea of salt produced by Black body through labor and exploitation.
Tem uma música do Milton Nascimento que é muito bonita nesse sentido, triste e bonita, né, nesse sentido.
There's a beautiful and sad song by Milton Nascimento about that.
Se chama Canção do Sal,
which is called the Song of Salt.
Que traz um pouco, né, como é que os nossos corpos produziam suor e sal no processo, né, do trabalho, né, da exploração do mundo do trabalho.
Where he talks how the exploitation in the world of labor, of work, produced salt through people's sweat in their bodies.
E o Caetano nos lembrou, né, que da violência da produção do açúcar para a nossa história, né, de como é que isso afetou nossos corpos também.
And Caetano brings out how the production of sugar and also inflicted violence upon Black bodies.
Enfim, para mim foi um prazer enorme. Gostaria muito de agradecer a toda a equipe, né, envolvida no projeto.
It was a real pleasure for me, and I want to thank the entire team involved in the project.
E dizer, em especial, que foi uma surpresa muito gostosa ver a Thaís Berbe também nessa edição.
And say that it was also a great and happy surprise to see Thaís Berbe in the edition in the issue as well.
Thaís Berbe é outra mulher negra também disputando esse audiovisual no sentido mais popular. Ela trabalhou em grandes produções nacionais também.
Thaís Berbe also works in the realm of audiovisual and film and screenwriting, and has also worked in relationship to many popular productions.
Enfim, gostaria de agradecer a oportunidade de conhecer também quem eu não conhecia, a Vivian, né? O André eu já conhecia mais o trabalho. Enfim, de conhecer vocês de um modo geral. E acho que por enquanto é isso. Se tiverem perguntas.
And so just wanted to thank the opportunity to get to know people's work, like André, who she knows personally, but whose work she got to know, and Viviane and others that she was able to learn about through this project. And she says, I guess that's it.
Thank you, Vivi. I think one comment I'll make that I think is a conversation for another day, but Vivi's story perhaps most closely or most explicitly brings in the idea of capital and what the relationship between capital and anthropophagia might be. I think that's a conversation for another day, but I think it is a huge topic to perhaps explore. I don't know.
Você entendeu, Vivi, que ela está falando que o tema do capital e a relação do capital com a antropofagia surgiu no conto de você de um jeito bastante forte. Que isso é uma conversa para outro dia, porque é uma conversa longa, mas é uma coisa que ela apreciou bastante.
One more point, and maybe this can lead into our Q&A, but I think it would be helpful maybe if Tiago or Vivi or somebody could maybe talk just briefly about the quotas that Vivi mentioned in when she was speaking just now, and the idea of what these quotas were and how they sort of have, I put this in the chat if anybody wants to see it, but how this idea of quotas has affected the cultural output in Brazil and what they are, because I think they're very important, but it's not something that American audiences are going to be familiar with.
So as I mentioned it very briefly at the editorial letters, the first moment we had quotes to Black people here in Brazil was in 2012, which is very recent. So different from United States, we didn't have in this institutional space actions who promote the accessibility of Black people to this kind of studies and discussions. So at the same time and almost simultaneously, we had access of some anti-colonial theoretical background, and it was like a seen from now, seen from here, it's like a time of briefing that me and my generation had, despite I and Vivi, we didn't attend at a university through quotes, but we watched this movement inside the university. And I'm not saying that, and the text of Maria Ino Clavo shared this also. I'm not saying that there is not important and political movement, cultural movement from the Black movement in Brazil and from different other groups as indigenous people and other marginalized people, but and different from what happened now, which the universities are being attacked by the government. We had this excited moment in Brazil, which we had access of these discussions in different ways and in different institutions, and now a lot of things are different. And sorry, I don't know if I was clear. And another question I saw on the chat was if anthropophagy is a metaphor, and this is a very complex. We are trying to answer it, but using a Renato Araújo expression, anthropophagy was a very powerful artistic receipt to digest, to feed, to eat the other, and in the beginning of the modernist moment here in Brazil, and along the time, the receipt was changing and it was being used by different means and sometimes not so easy to take. So, and I prefer to agree with Renato when he said that more than a metaphor, it's a receipt we can change a little bit now for another taste. And Sara, what do you think we can share the Caetano Dias poem now? Because our time, it's a little
Yeah, I
Sure.
think unless anybody has other questions,
Yeah, we did have a couple come through before in the chat, and people have left things. Unless anyone has to hurry, do we have maybe 10 minutes to voice some questions? Great. Well, in that case, I'm going to take the opportunity to pass it to, we'll go first to Malvika. Malvika?
Hi, thanks, Charlie. And thank you, everyone. This panel has been so just like eye-opening, really refreshing, like what a treat. My question is for Tiago, but it's, I guess, a little more broad as well. But I was really interested. So you interviewed two people for the critics page, the introduction. And I was kind of wondering if you could speak a little bit about that process of like collecting those oral histories, that method, and then the process of turning the oral histories that they shared with you into the prose that became the document that we all have read now.
Do you wanna answer it, Sara? I can hear.
you did the interviews. I think you should talk about the process. I think what I can say is that Tiago did many hours of interviews and he did a lot of distilling to make them brief. But I'll let you say the rest.
Sorry, I just invited Sara. It's not because, well, because she helped me a lot to learn how to do it, because I have to say it's the first time I accept this kind of task. It's a big task, and I feel so honored, but I feel so pressure also. It's well, I really like Brewing Rail. It's a lot of responsibility. Sorry, but at the same time, I was thinking about people like they're almost Brazilian, as Vivian said. I think I was thinking, should I wait and be able to do it as the big names used to do? Like how can I be myself, and how can I help the other to be their self in this task? And I tried to think in people who are literally less absorbed here, but less listened. Because, for example, Sandra Benitez, she's the first indigenous curator at an important institution here in São Paulo, but it was like last year that it happened. And she, like me, she's in this process to build bridges between these different worlds. And so I'm so grateful that people had time to contribute, and some people are so busy that they almost said no, but I truly believe that their stories are important to tell, to share, as Cripta de Jean, the Pichador, as Sandra Benitez, and as André Pitol did with Claudia Andujá story. So this process was, I did interview, but definitely it was not a lonely process, and Sara helped me to organize my goals and aims in this process, and the rest is part of, as Viviane Pistache said, is part of our way to understand this world who we desire.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much for that, Tiago. I'm going to ask a question on behalf of an audience member who had to leave early. This audience member says, can Tiago talk about the epigram that opens the introductory essay? Especially would like to know more about Davi Kopinawa, the Yanomami cause.
Well, there's so many connections between the text and images that I would like to share, but our time is short, and this was one of them, because Davi Kopenawa plays a role very important in Claudio Andujar work. So it's almost I couldn't have access to him to ask him to do some contributions, but thanks. I think his presence as Denilson Banio, as Sandra Benito, is so important to think how the anthropophagy is not exactly a concept, may use it as the indigenous people thinking about it. There's a big distance between how the indigenous people, especially the Tupinamba people, and how these concepts are used as an artistic recipe in Brazil. So inviting these names with different ideas about the assimilation of the other is very important for this edition. And this phrase is important because, as André Pitol said, Claudio Andujar was a very important activist against the violence against the violence to interaction of indigenous people in Brazil, especially Yanomami people, which Davi Kopenawa is part.
Thanks very much for that, Tiago. Our final question in the question and answer segment is going to come from our publisher, Fong Bui. And after Fong speaks, we will go to the amazing poetry that we have in store. Fong?
Thank you, Charlie. Thank you, Tiago, Roffino, Ramon, Andrea, Vivi, who else I did not thank. It's Vivian, of course. It's a fantastic guest critic page. It gave us this aspiration that we will take it around the globe, you guys, before I get deported back to the old country. Hello. But we know, we read over a few times and we know so much more than we did before. And when we talk about Brazil, we understood and been informed so much of history. We know about Brazilian architecture, Brasilia. We know dating from Oscar Minaya to also today, even Gustavo Pena or Decio Tozzi. We know about the art for sure, you know, because the last decade or more, modern museum and other museum in the United States have been paying attention and whatnot. But I remember very clearly coming across the correspondence between Elizabeth Bishop and her great friend Robert Lowe, the great poet. You know, she spent so much time, nearly 2 decades of her coming into fruition as an author, mostly written while she was in Brazil, of course. But I'm thinking in the pessimism in Brazilian literature, particularly when I read Machado de Assis, for example, The Epitaph for Small Windows, one of the very important book that led me to decide to live a life without having children, because that book was so profound. You guys remember? It's Brás Cubas, you know, who tells his own life story from beyond the grave, so to speak, you know, noting from his endless terrible mistake, failed romances. But the one thing he's very proud of is not having children. And he claimed that it's a not possession, the perpetual misery of life. So my question is, how do you guys put in the context of that literature, that tradition of pessimism? I know that the Assis was a huge admirer of Schopenhauer, because I know that he literally reconstruct Schopenhauer, the word as will and representation, the famous philosophical work, which also influenced Immanuel Kant. I was talking to Nick and Yassi just last night about Kant. So going back to that again, it's like, how would Brazilian literature have a bearing in your thinking at today, so to speak? Vivi, maybe Vivi or Ramon, anyone can start, including Roffino.
I well, I'm not sure if I'm completely able to answer you, but I have to say that you pick a very important example and a very and at the same time a big challenge for us, because, for example, there is no homogeneous idea about which means anthropophagy now in this issue, in this edition. We will see some texts that in some way reimagine this idea of anthropophagy as a tool to fight against the old and new challenges, the old and new conservatories, the old and new fascists, for example. But at the same time, you can see some examples who truly reject this kind of heritage. It's not so radical, but as you can see in Caetano Dias' texts, who prefer to think in other terms about this legacy, this heritage. And this is the reason of this is because it's still a big hurt to think how we can manifest our identity, even ethnic identity, peripheral identity, in terms of institutional place, in terms of institutional positions, for example. So why I'm saying that? Because during the 18th century, during the time that Mário de Andrade, Machado de Assis was writing, it's a very different way to think about Black identity. It's very different way to think about how we should be in this kind of institutions. In other words, it was impossible to do what they did doing this racial affirmation, for example. So in his text, everything is not so obviously as we desire now. Right. And I think this is something we can see in different texts in this edition. There's this big wish to say we had been doing a lot of negotiations, but for now, some negotiations is too much, and I think I cannot tell and I cannot represent the literary legacy. I cannot represent the. I'm not a writer. I mean, but I definitely can say that we are in this. This edition has this powerful message. This is a battlefield now in Brazil. This is a battlefield between artists. You see a lot of indigenous and Black artists, for example, not only, and feminists, and we have a beautiful number of female artists and thinkers in these editions. But what I would say is, this is your question is it's a problem not solved.
Right. Well, so, I mean, you speak so eloquently. I don't know why you claim not speak English well enough. You just did beautifully. Thank you so much. But yeah, I mean, again, I'm just always been incredibly impressed by him. You know, just knowing that he taught himself how to read and write in French and English, German, Greek, and I mean, and other languages is so impressive. Never gone, I don't think even gone to finish high school, forget about college, you know? So he's always been my hero. Yeah,
Yes,
I admire him so much. So
he deserve. But we still producing heroes. So
Andrea, I mean, Vivi, do you have anything to add to that? Even at the cost of Ramon's translation? I don't know. Hello.
Então, eu não sei, Vivi, eu não sei o quanto você entendeu da pergunta, mas estava falando sobre o pessimismo na literatura, o Machado de Assis, até comentou que nas obras póstumas de Brás Cubas, a referência à alegria de não ter filhos, e como ele decidiu não ter filhos e por isso esse texto inspirou ele a se sentir bem sobre isso, mas esse conceito assim do pessimismo na literatura e conectá-lo com o que a gente tem estado falando, talvez um pouco com o seu texto, porque você já falou que você queria mostrar o lado mais feio e dolorido assim da história, né? Não simplesmente falar se fosse a resistência, mas mostrar algo em relação a essas narrativas de raça e gênero que você referiu, né? Que você queria mostrar um outro lado ou dar um outro tom para essa conversa. Não sei se você tem alguma coisa para comentar.
Comentar rapidamente aqui. Eu também não sou originalmente da literatura, né? Escrever roteiro, eu acho que é um pouco mais fácil do que fazer literatura.
She says, I'm not in the area of literature per se, and writing screenplays is a little bit easier than writing literature, but
de um modo mais tentando uma leitura mais panorâmica,
but doing a wider reading.
Acho que a tentativa de equilíbrio, né, de revelar faces mais pessimistas ou mais otimistas na nossa ficção, no nosso pensamento brasileiro.
I think that the balance to strike between showing the optimistic and pessimistic faces in our Brazilian literature
depende um pouco de se vai enfocar, né, o aspecto mais heróico ou a derrota de muitos processos históricos mal acabados no Brasil.
So it depends on a decision to focus on what is heroic or to focus on the many defeats that are and historical processes that remain unfinished and continue to this day in Brazil.
Falo da abolição mal acabada.
Talking about abolition really being unfinished.
Democracia mal acabada.
Democracy is also unfinished.
E, por vezes, né, dá para ler com um pouco de esperança as vitórias nesses processos de luta.
And at times you can read hope into the small victories in our struggles.
E o modo como os povos marginalizados celebraram e inventaram maneiras de viver e não sucumbir diante das dificuldades desses dois processos históricos.
And how marginalized peoples have not given in completely and have found ways to live and to exist within this repressive reality.
Tem historiador brasileiro chamado Luiz Antônio Simas.
There's é escritor?
Ele é sambista.
Oh, okay. There's a samba musician named Luiz Antônio Simas.
Que ele fala que a gente só faz festa, só faz samba porque tem muita coisa dando errado.
And he says that we only dance samba and have parties because there's many things going wrong.
Festas e celebração e a criatividade é escape, é sintoma do que não está funcionando, para o que não está funcionando.
Yeah, and that parties and music and celebrations are escape valves from all kinds of things that are going wrong and are horrible in society.
E eu acho que desde Machado, né, muita coisa avançou também no debate histórico, tanto de raça, de gênero e de democracia brasileira.
And there's been many advances since Machado's time in terms of the debate around race and gender and democracy in Brazil.
Mas muita coisa também está mal resolvida.
But many things are unfinished and have not been resolved at all.
E a gente continua nesse embate, né, entre avanços e retrocessos.
We keep bouncing back and forth between advances and setbacks in that process.
E é disso que surge, por ora, as poucas vitórias que a gente celebra e as muitas razões para ter pessimismo, né? Continuar tendo pessimismo.
And so it's from that kind of situation that we have these glimmers of hope, but then also many reasons to be pessimistic.
A Sara tinha perguntado sobre cotas.
Sara had asked a question about quotas, affirmative action quotas.
E pensando cotas raciais dentro das universidades e cotas de gênero e de raça na política.
And thinking about racial quotas in universities and then within larger society and politics.
A gente acabou conhecendo processo super interessante assim de como é que isso repercutiu, né, na vida do povo preto e das mulheres no país.
And we have really been witness to a powerful process that has really had deep repercussions in the lives and situations of Black people and women in the country.
No caso das universidades, as cotas foram fundamentais, mas muito insuficientes.
In the case of universities, the quotas were fundamental but insufficient.
Obviamente que foram necessárias, mas a maior parte da população preta não teve acesso a esse tipo de política.
They were obviously necessary, but the vast majority of the Black population did not get access to those institutions.
Can I ask one question? Have the quotas been maintained since they were first initiated, or have they been at risk because of the political powers now?
As cotas desde que se iniciaram no presente até o presente ou estão em perigo de ocorrem o risco de serem de algum jeito anuladas ou
Sim, começa esse debate agora, né, de que as cotas vão ser vai ver se continua ou não, né? A partir de já começou esse debate ano passado, assim.
The debate surrounding this started already last year. There's definitely talk about
sobre a validade temporal das cotas, né? Se estende por mais tempo ou se ela corre o risco de acabar, né?
Yeah, there's a debate around the temporal validity, whether they've served their purpose and should be ended or whether to continue them.
E como a gente vive tempos muito difíceis políticos, a chance de estar ameaçada é real.
And the threat is real because we're living really difficult political times in Brazil.
Ano passado circulou bastante projeto de lei do vereador que infelizmente é negro, Fernando Holliday, né? Projeto de lei que ele colocou na LERJ para acabar com as cotas no estado de São Paulo, as cotas nas universidades em São Paulo.
There's a legislator who unfortunately is Black who promoted a law to get rid of the quotas in Alerj in São Paulo.
Well, thank you, Ramon. I think that Vivi should run for the office. I will vote for her. As the Sis say, a life without fighting is a dead sea in the universal organism. So, thank you. Grazie mille.
Ele falou que você deve concorrer para algum cargo político que ele votaria em você. E também falou que é verdade que a resistência, sem resistência, o organismo não pode seguir. Então, acho que falou alguma coisa assim. Não estou lembrando as palavras exatas, mas é isso.
Obrigada.
Thank you, Fong. Thank you, Vivi and Ramon, for facilitating that conversation. Thank you, Sara and Tiago, for bringing us here. At the Rail, we have a tradition of ending our lunches with a poem. It's a tradition that we've carried into these community events. Today, I'm excited to share a poem that has been sent by video by Caetano Dias. The piece is about 9 minutes. The first half of the minute takes place in darkness. I just want you to know that so that you don't think something's going wrong with your screen. I hope you enjoy. And when the poem ends, I will come back on for a few closing remarks and our warm Zoom hug.
I'll just add one point about the poem. It is published on the website of the Brooklyn Rail in Portuguese and English. And there are some very helpful footnotes because within the poem, you really have a whole history of references and pieces of information that are somewhat difficult to understand if you don't have the footnotes. So I encourage you to look at them if you're interested.
Thank you, Sara.
Carne na rua, ossos, direita da lama, além do santo carmo, barro, além do lodo, além do carmo, além dos adobes, a rua, nos ossos, a rua dos carvões,
Achieco.
Minha terra não tem palmeiras, nem canto de sabiás. Nesse descampado não há mato e tampouco cães sem dono e de caminho encruzilhado. Nesse deserto idílico acha-se feio ser íntimo na minha terra arrasada, em campos de osso onde morrerás morte vil da mão forte por um golpe de birapema, institucional crueira de maniva. Pau na moleira. Meus heróis morreram imberbes e os cacetetes de pau-brasil passeiam numa boa, onde a burguesia ainda come a minha carne e a tem dura entre os dentes. Ditadura, carne amargosa, lugar de passarinhos que entre palmeiras nunca cantam, sabias? Ó incautos sabiás. Dito de Amaral a Amoral, meus heróis pretos e mulatos morreram imberbes. Celebra moderníssima a carne mais barata, ainda é a do negro aquilombado no morro da favela, às margens do Vaza Barris. Posto que às margens do Ipiranga é derrisão hegemônica. Modernissimamente barroco como um antropófago em suas tripas e com sangue vazado cordialmente. Como sim estou comendo. Comam a carne mais barata do negro na terra do desterro de 2020 contínuos. 22 reflexos de Gonçalo Alves estendidos aos réis do chão, sem que Gonçalves Dias e Juca Pirama, nas mãos dos Timbira ou os Andrades modernistas, sem saber, relatassem o acontecido literário. Enquanto troncos de bananeira, de peso esquálido e apequenado, desaparecem no sinistro da história. Esvisceradas pororocas, não versadas dos sertões, e a guerra do fim do mundo às margens do sol mulato na corrente do Vaza Barris, entre Canudos e a matadeira no morro da favela. Suspiros saudosos da promessa de nação. O navio negreiro é abatido e naufraga no mais árido Brasil raso da Catarina, na Bahia. Vaza sem piedade nas mãos de Dilermando e sua amante, ou amando do pré-modernista indigente. Às vésperas das cinzas de uma quarta ladainha manifesta. Maldito! Dito isso mesmo! Modernismo que ainda nos seus intestinos as minhas entranhas tens, não digeridas. Doce e indigesto manifesto para amargosa. Amargosa transbordante. Na pindaíba do recôncavo. vaza barris chupados de tutano oco no Morro da Providência urticante, avizinhado, apinhado. Sangue pisado em cachaça e jurubeba, via tarraxas abertas por pequenino gotejo. Embriago-me às vésperas das cinzas de um quarto gole. A favela vaza memórias de cheiro de fumo de corda que pagam a carne mais barata a gente na outra margem atlântica. Canudos sangram em festa moderna que celebra o incômodo que tenta o esquecimento. Às vésperas das cinzas de uma quarta ladainha, manifesta um terço afogado, calado, desterrado. Só terra amarga, só terra lacinante, a favela que ainda vaza com a truculência da máquina. Descampados, matos. A qualquer hora, Gregório, no passado contínuo, ainda diz: triste Bahia, triste Brasil, ó quão dessemelhante no meu calado desterro que vaza incontinente. A ti tocou-te a máquina mercante de 22 mortos a qualquer instante para ti. Máquina! No lodo margeante, em berbe, suposto brado do Ipiranga em menosprezo subjacente. Tanto negócio e tanto negociante civilizado. Culto e oculta dos pretos a carne regurgitada por bandeirantes de tez alva. E de cara susto. Susto diferente e incômodo no mal-estar da festa que celebra eu servido no banquete a gente douta e de linhagem. Minha identidade destituída em desacato à minha raça mestiça e desterrada por ordem judiciosa executada por milícia quatrocentona de bandeiras implacáveis. Cocorobó às vésperas das cinzas de uma quarta mando do manifesto antropófago indigente em rito vazio. Mastro atravessa o peito de 12 pueris e hasteia a bandeira do esquadrão da elite para a festa no Cabula, com corpos de garotos da Vila Moisés, em 17 de 1º de 2015. E seus 12 corpos são servidos à sociedade indigente. A favela vaza em labaredas a cada 22 instantes. E ninguém faz ou diz nada, pois o mundo tem fim aqui. Extirpar essa estirpe mestiça, parda e preta, diz o lema aos com não linhagem dos 400. Só contagem em 23/6/1993, em que Paulo Roberto de Oliveira, 11 anos, Anderson de Oliveira Pereira, 13 anos, Marcelo Cândido de Jesus, 14 anos, Valdivino Miguel de Almeida, 14 anos, Gambarzinho, 17 anos, Leandro Santos da Conceição, 17 anos, Paulo José da Silva, 18 anos, Marcos Antônio Alves da Silva, 19 anos. Eis o banquete que se atualiza. Ser índio é ter um futuro com horizonte a sonhar. Corpos vazados por calibre 12 a cada 22 instantes. Em centenário breve comemorarei enquanto civilizado na semana de 22. Aí cantarei e contarei quantos foram servidos a cada instante. Meus heróis morreram em berbes. A negra já exama de leite a qualquer hora é comida. E o seu filho arrancado de si, pois a carne mais barata é negra. Afirma um jovem preto ou pardo. Seios vazam a perda a cada 22 instantes. Sem caráter algum, carne púbere, doce em vida amarga de cismar caiporas com caipirinhas a macunaíma. Amargosa, minha terra, vaza e transborda a cada 22 instantes uma festa esfuziante. Cabula, Candelária, canudos em Bedegó em chamas na fricção da negra de 22 instantes. Semana da chacina na Candelária ou desaparecimento e morte de Davi Fiuza, que há mais de 5 anos aterroriza a mãe. Morto aos 16 anos, com mestre das técnicas de morte em Salvador. Na semana de 22, a qualquer quase instante, 22 ou mais quase crianças estão os réis do Brasil. Dessarte. Você já foi à Bahia, nega? Não? Então vá.
Thank you for that, Caetano. Thank you, Sara and Tiago. And thanks to everyone whose questions were out there. Thanks to Fong for the stimulating conversation at the end. And now we shall activate all the microphones so that everyone has a chance to say goodbye and hello.
Surpreendency. Surpreendency.
Obrigado. Thank you so much, Sara and Tiago.
Thank you.
And Vivian,
Thank
Andre,
you
and
so
Ramon,
much,
and
everyone.
Vivian, that was so
Tiago.
incredible.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you,
so
Tiago
much.
and Sara.
Vivian.
Obrigada,
Muito
obrigada.
Andre.
Obrigada,
Thank
Tiago.
you.
Obrigado.
Obrigada.
Thank you, Vivian. Thank you, Vivi. Thanks, Ramon, for all the translation work.
This is such a beautiful
helpful and useful.
conversation.
Amazing.
Yes.
Sarah, thanks, Tiago.
Thank you, Caetano.